I'm Kay Lemon, Executive Director of the Marketing Science Institute. As many of you know, MSI serves as the bridge between marketing theory and business practice. We fund research by leading academics worldwide on topics voted on by our 70-plus corporate sponsors and disseminate results through members-only events and a variety of publications. I'm really pleased to welcome you to another MSI For Members by Members webinar. This is a series of webinars on subjects related to MSI's current research priority topics. First, I'd like to point out the Chat with Presenter function in the left-hand corner of your screen. Please use this feature to send through any questions you have for our speaker during the presentation. We'll gather the questions and have a brief Q&A session following the presentation. Also, Peter's slides, as well as the entire webinar, will be available for download on the MSI member website. Now I'd like to introduce you to today's featured speaker. Peter Verhoef is professor at the University of Groningen and has kindly agreed to present today's webinar on creating value with big data analytics. It's especially gratifying for me to introduce Peter today because Peter and I have had the opportunity to work on several research projects together, and I just think so highly of Peter and his work. He's a professor of marketing in the Department of Marketing at the Faculty of Economics and Business at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. His research interests focus on customer management, customer loyalty, multi-channel issues, category management, and buying behavior of organic products. He's extensively published in every top journal in marketing and has won almost every marketing award, especially the prestigious Chess Foundation Journal of Marketing Award, which is given to the paper that has had the longest impact on marketing theory and practice. He has extensive teaching experience, undergraduate, graduate, PhD, and executives, and he's the founder of the Customer Insights Center at the University of Groningen. He's also the department chair and has just written a book on this topic of big data analytics and marketing. And when I saw the book, I said, I'd really love for you to share these insights with our members. And so, Peter, welcome.
Thank you, Kay. Thank you for these nice words. And thank you all for signing up for this webinar. Today, I'd like to share, as Kay also mentioned, basically the insights, what we've written down in our book. And the book is entitled Creating Value with Big Data Analytics, Making Smarter Marketing Decisions. And it's joint work with Edwin, Kooge, and Natasha from Meterslab. These are my co-authors. Why did we write this book? Actually, and this is probably not new for you, but one of the major trends in today's business is actually that big data is very important. There's research, for instance, from McKinsey that actually show that big data could have a strong impact on the growth of gross national products across the world. And you actually see that that is an important topic. Some people call it the 21st century gold rush, mining in big data. It seems to be so important that many companies are actually now setting up big data teams, big data departments, are hiring big data analysts to observe what they can learn on many aspects of their business, and specifically how they can improve, for instance, their marketing decision making. However, you also see some claims that maybe big data is just another management fad. Some people even call it that big data is bullshit. That's one of the comments, for instance, made by a guru called Nassim Nicholas Taleb. So you actually see that sometimes in business there's a lot of disappointment about the developments you could achieve of big data. First, one of the notions in our book is actually that you could see that big data is just a development that has a long background, especially in marketing. For instance, there is some people that actually say also that one of the most important lessons that can be learned from the history of marketing is that everybody is inclined to embrace new data sources. And we've seen that with the scanner revolution. We probably have also seen that with the CRM revolution. And now we're in the era of the big data revolution. we just see that more and more data get at our disposal. The question is, how do we create value with these data? And for that reason, we have written a book, Creating Value with Big Data Analytics. And in this book, we lay out how companies can actually create value using big data analytics and how they should implement that in their organization. One of the most important frameworks in our book is our big data value creation model. This big data value creation model starts with the fact that companies nowadays have lots of big data, and we call them big data assets. And these big data can vary in all kinds of aspects, and I will detail more about that later on. Within these companies, there are all kinds of capabilities surrounding these data, such as systems you should have good people, there should be a good organization, and also the processes you have in your organization are important. Furthermore, if you have these capabilities, you're able to execute several big data analytics. And these analytics can provide insights, but they can also be used to estimate all kinds of models, which can be used then for decision support, action campaigns, but also importantly, we see more and more information-based products and solutions. And finally, the final aim should be that you create value with these data, and there we make a distinction between value for the firm and value to the customer. So this model we use specifically as a kind of structure in our book where we have all kinds of chapters surrounding these big data assets, big data capabilities, big data analytics, and big data value. In my presentation, I will use this framework as a kind of structure. Let me first start with value, because value is the ultimate aim of analytics and of marketing. We want to create value both for the firm and the customer. It's important to know that thereby we take a kind of perspective where we see two dimensions of value creation. First, it's important to see that you can basically focus on solely value to the customers, where you have all kind of, where you could, for instance, focus on customer satisfaction or delivering a high brand value, but you can also say my focus is solely on value to the firm. And what we've seen, for instance, in the past, for instance, specifically in the CRM area, we've seen many firms to focus strongly on value to firm topics. For instance, there has been a strong focus on lifetime value, which can be beneficial for the firm, but only in the long run when it is combined with creating value to the customers, where we are basically in a win-win situation. This 2x2 matrix is a kind of way how we look at value creation within firms. From a big data perspective, it's then important that you understand which metrics are you going to use and what are you actually planning to analyze. In our book, we basically make three distinctions, or we make three levels of metrics. First, we look at the market level. Second, we look at the brand level. And third, we look at the customer level. And in the value to customer, you can, for instance, think of metrics such as product awareness, product attractiveness at the market level. At the brand level, you see all kinds of metrics such as brand consideration, brand preference, brand liking, whereas at the customer level, you will see things like customer satisfaction, the Net Promoter Score, or specific reviews you can find online. Big data provides all kinds of new metrics, although that doesn't, and I hereby want to say that does not mean that old metrics are no longer valid. But for instance, you can go to use Google to see what is actually happening with search patterns on new products. For instance, here I show search patterns of Google for the tablet category. And here you can see over time how these search patterns are developing, and you also see certain peaks over time. And this can show the interest in the market in a specific product category. For value to firm metrics, there are all kinds of metrics which we are generally well known, but you can think of market volume, size, market growth at the market level, brand penetration, brand sales, brand equity, and at the customer level you can think about customer lifetime value, customer engagement value, but importantly nowadays we also see many metrics surrounding the path to purchase, and that specifically happens in the online world. So these metrics can be measured and can also enter all kinds of databases and dashboards. In our book, we also discuss some cases. One of the cases we discuss, for instance, for a specific metric, is the case for a customer lifetime value for an energy supplier, where we, based on extensive analysis of a large database at this firm, we've seen that you can decompose the lifetime value of customers in all kinds of categories. For instance, 69% of the CLV in this supplier comes from revenues they earn from just selling their gas and their electricity, while only 3% can be attributed to retention. And we also observe that service costs and bad debt and payment enforcement methods are important components of their CLV. And based on this analysis, this energy supplier, for instance, focused strongly on developing methods to reduce their costs. And for instance to reduce their service costs. When it comes to the big data, we actually see, and that actually the amount of data is exploding. And that means, importantly, that you need a conscious data strategy. And this data creation of this data development are mainly happening because you see, for instance, an important increase in what's happening online. You see many new digital media, mobile media, etc. You also see a lot of data storage that is enabling this, and specifically I want to mention all kinds of cloud storage solutions. But you see, for instance, here that every 2 years the amount of data doubles in the world. So that is actually a very strong development. And that's, of course, one of the reasons we've also started to write up this book. This is a very, well, let's say maybe one of the most famous ways of to look at big data, where you have these things like the 5 V's of big data. There's an increasing volume, velocity, variety, veracity, and value in these data. So you see much more data volume. We see, and importantly, you also see, for instance, that there are much more data sources. To focus on that, we make a classification or a distinction in a couple of data types. First, we distinguish between structured data types and unstructured data. And that's probably one of the most important distinctions. So in a big data area, we've moved much more from structured data to unstructured data. Unstructured data can be found on social media, blogs, etc. Beyond that, you can make a distinction between internal and external data. So the internal data would be typically CRM data, sales data, invoice data, and campaign data. These are typically the structured data. Internal unstructured data, for instance, data that arrives from customer contact data, and these can also be unstructured. For instance, emails can be written, call centers where you can tape the talks in the telephone conversation are typically unstructured. Beyond that, the external structured data are things that we know for years, such as market research data, so survey data, credit scoring, household data from, for instance, companies such as GfK. One of the important challenges is how do you actually relate all this data and how do you integrate all this data? And, for instance, also what is the value of these new data sources? is information that we can gather at social media, at Google, is it really valuable to create our understanding of what we know from customers? Therefore, for instance, you can use the following model or the following conceptual line of thinking, the 5 W's of a customer-centric organization. You want to know, for instance, who is the customer, what is the customer doing or using, where is the customer using the product, when does the customer buy the product and use it, and what are the reasons for customers to buy the product. And what you will see, for instance, is that survey data as a form of external, frequently structured data are very useful, for instance, to understand the reasons why customers behave the way they behave. Behavioral data, what we can find, for instance, in CRM databases, are very useful to understand who is the customer. For instance, you can profile customers to see that your customers are different from the population. Maybe they have higher income or have a lower age or whatever. You can also see what the customer is actually doing or using with this data. You can probably also see where the customer is using this data. The social data might provide you mainly some information, at least when people are sharing their brand usage, or they might provide you some information about, for instance, where is the customer using the product. For instance, on Facebook, they can show that they are drinking a Kooge or are using their Apple computer on a specific place. Or they can also share why they have chosen that specific product or not on social media. And mobile data can, for instance, provide us some information where the customer is using the product and probably also where they're searching the product. So you can classify, maybe that's more important, you can classify each data source on what you want to learn from customers and what you want to understand about customer behavior and their motivations. One of the most important challenges, and that's why we also included a chapter on privacy, is actually that the big data developments create a strong discussion within society on what is actually happening with privacy. And this is important not only from a customer's perspective, but you also observe actually that governments are worried about these developments and are setting up regulations to protect the privacy of customers. Beyond that, for instance, in the online world, you see that customers are using app blockers to protect their own privacy online. So this is an important issue where we also pay attention to. What you see across the globe is there are strong differences in privacy regulation. You see, for instance, already strong differences between the European Union and for instance, the USA, or you see strong differences between Canada and the USA, where we don't want to talk about how your privacy is protected in Russia and China. So, but the trend might actually be that privacy regulation will be stronger and stronger in the coming years. And then the question is, how do you handle specific privacy-sensitive data? Here we provide just a scheme to show what you could do. One of the things maybe that is to ask customers their permission to use that data. So that's a more kind of permission-based strategy. Another way could be basically to try to that you're using the data, but that basically you're using a kind of system that you pseudonymize the data or anonymize the data. So you analyze the data, but it's not clear which customers you're actually customer data you are analyzing. So the customer ID cannot be linked to what you're analyzing. A final way could be to aggregate the data, and basically then you ignore the customer's specific cases, but you analyze the data in an aggregate way. So that's the way, and in the book we discuss much more about how firms should handle privacy. One of the important claims is actually that firms should be aware of what is happening in this era and should take, if possible, a more proactive approach, and not only consider, they say, okay, what are the legal consequences and what are we allowed to do legally, but also to consider more in say, okay, what could be potential issues when we ignore privacy too much and when we might harm the customer in the long run. Let me come to the next step in our model. So that's big data analytics. And in big data analytics, it's important to note that in our vision, and also that has been emphasized in multiple studies, that investing in analytical capability has a strong impact on the financial performance, although that differs between industries. And these claims have been made both in the managerial literature as well as in the academic marketing literature, for which I show a graph here. Already, Thomas Davenport some years ago mentioned that firms can develop different levels of statistical sophistication. Frequently, we see that many firms are still in the era of, let's say, dashboards, reports, and monitors. So they basically do a lot of descriptive analytics and want to know what is exactly the problem and what is actually happening. Analytics goes a step further. We want to know why is something happening and what will probably happen next. And in some cases, we even want to optimize our actions. One of the issues with big data is that there's now such an amount of data that there are vast opportunities to analyze the data. And in our view, there are basically four ways of handling analytics, and there are four analytical strategies. And here we make the distinction between the frame problem and do you have predefined data. A typical way, what we've seen in the past is actually you have a marketing problem. For instance, you see that your loyalty is going down, or you want to increase your brand awareness, or you want to increase your brand equity, and then the question is how you're going to do that. Typically, you will then look for the right data and you take a problem-solving approach. Another way could actually be that you're not sure about the data, but you have some fixed problem and you try to find, for instance, you try to build a specific prediction model. So you're going to do data modeling. In many cases, big data also leads to a kind of way that say, well, I'm just have some data, I don't know what I'm finding, but I'm going to mine the data and see what I can learn from that. And that approach can provide, on the one hand, provide some innovations, can provide new knowledge. There's a famous example from Tesco where they learned, for instance, that customers buying diapers on Friday evening also bought beer. So that could imply that they basically should do these, maybe try to do beer in promotion or take other actions. But it could also lead to a lot of, let's say, energy and all kind of patterns which you maybe not find or do not have a lot of meaning. Beyond that, you will see if you do data mining approaches where it's not clear what you find, and it might provide no clear directions. There's a last category which we call collateral catch. That's basically you're analyzing the data. For instance, you're analyzing what is actually happening on your online website. Why do people in the end purchase your product? And then you find actually that there are strong differences between mobile devices, at least you did not think about it, but when analyzing data, you find strong difference between mobile devices and fixed devices. And that can be something you did not know on forehand, and then it can be considered as a kind of collateral catch. It's important before analyzing the data to define your analytical strategy. We have we generally in our book we prefer a more problem-solving approach because that provides stronger directions in what you're going to do in your marketing strategy. So there, in this approach, we face a problem. You try to find out what is actually happening. Maybe you set up hypothesis, and it's probably kind of interaction between the data and your hypothesis. So you'll learn when analyzing the data, and in the end, you hope to have a kind of solution. However, I already mentioned that the example of the difference between fixed devices, a tablet and a smartphone, but we also sometimes learn that collateral catches can be insightful as well. So, how is big data changing analytics? There are many ways to look at that. We take a perspective again from the market level, brand and product level, and the customer level. One of the major things in big data analytics is that we, and it's already mentioned, we much move more to unstructured data that holds almost for every decision level. We also move much more to multi-source data. And in a big data environment, but it maybe coincides what is happening in many markets, is that it's becoming more turbulent. Beyond that, for instance, the customer level, we see that you will also see a stronger focus, for instance, at customer engagement. And in general, but that's not only big data, but you also see a stronger focus on how we want to link, for instance, specific marketing actions, but also survey data to marketing outcomes, such as market share or customer lifetime value or brand equity. So big data is definitely changing analytics, not only so in let's say the relevance and the type of data that we have and the type of analytics we're using. And just to give you an example, is that what we observed in the telco market a couple of years ago is that these firms were confronted with, or frequently already had very large databases. But probably these firms were also confronted with some disruptive elements, and which we call WhatsApp. So the text messaging moved much more to the WhatsApp apps on all kind of smartphones. And what many firms there still did was basically looking at the aggregate side of their market. So they did aggregate analytics. But instead, because what happened actually is that one specific segment started using their smartphones, and specifically also started to use WhatsApp strongly, especially the young generation at that point. And that was then ignored, but at some point you saw that this development diffused through the market, and at some point actually all telephone users, of let's say the vast majority of telephone users, were actually moving to WhatsApp, leading to a decrease in sales across for many phone companies. And what did these phone companies do wrong? One of the major things is they focused still on the aggregate analytics and ignored what was happening in the segment level. And that's an important lesson for big data, is that you should explore what is happening. So you should do more in-depth analysis and should look also what is happening, first in this case, at the segment level, especially in disruptive environments. So we also say, okay, from the analytics side, we see some trends. First, we see a trend that we move from analyzing samples to analyzing the full population. And that has some important implications. One of these, and maybe the major trend, is actually that we were used to analyze, let's say, small samples, and we're now getting used to analyze much more larger samples, even going sometimes to the full population. One of the major trends is actually that we move from significance to substantive and size effects. So only finding significant effects is probably not good enough, because if you have very large samples, even small effects can be very significant. So it's getting more and more important to show the substantiveness of the effect and the size of the effect. We also see a trend from ad hoc data collection to much more continuous data collection. And really the statistical side, we see a trend moving from standard to more computer science models. You see now many computer scientists entering this whole analytical environment in firms. And finally, we see a trend from ad hoc models, which we used to typically estimate. For instance, we want to understand market share developments or customer churn, to much more real-time models, especially in the era of personalization. In our book, we make a distinction between classic analytics and big data analytics. I'm not going through this whole list, but you see in classic analytics, you can see analytics like very descriptive analytics, such as profiling, but also more, let's say, predictive analytics, such as trend analysis and predictive modeling, specifically at the customer level. At the big data, we see a lot of what's happening is online. So we talk about web analytics, importantly also about attribution modeling. So how can you attribute a specific sale online to specific touch points, but also, for instance, social listening. And what I want to do in this presentation to briefly sketch some developments in the big data area. But importantly, we also learned when writing the book that many of, let's say, the analytics underlying the analysis you will do in big data are to some extent similar or are a bit adapted. One of the important trends in a more descriptive way is that you see nowadays a lot of what we call A/B testing. That basically means, especially in the online world, that different versions of, for instance, a website are shown to large populations. So this is these samples are much larger than what we actually see, for instance, in many consumer research studies. And then they basically want to see what is the best website. And then there could be a winner. We did some research some years ago, actually, where we also did a large-scale experiment, but there we said a firm actually abandoned a catalog from their channels as a search channel and wanted to understand, among a large sample of customers, I think around 25,000 customers, what was actually happening between customers that were not getting the catalog and customers that did get the catalog. And actually what we show here is not so much the significance of the facts, but basically what we're interested in, and then we're getting back what is actually happening with the value created for customers. We wanted to show what is actually, and value created for the firm, what is actually happening if we delete the catalog. And in this case, we show that if you delete the catalog, that your profits are actually increasing. And you can read more about this in the paper published in the International Journal of Research and Marketing by Umut Konus in 2014. Attribution modeling is the issue. Can we attribute a sale to a specific touch point? And we see nowadays that many customers are using all kinds of specific touch points, and it is sometimes unclear what is actually happening and how you can attribute a specific let's say, touch point to a specific sale of the individual customer. In our book, we briefly described a case of an online retailer, and one of the big issues is in modeling this is to the fact that the touch point used is different in different phases across the purchase process. So for instance, if you're watching a television or if you're basically a bit browsing online, you might be in the search process, while if you really are Googling and very focused with strong buying motives, you might be much closer to the purchase process. And here we compared a developed attribution model with the typical used per model in practice, which is called last click, where you attribute your sale to the last used touch point, and you actually see differences to a more complicated compared. The last click method definitely is different from the attribution model, and the attribution model, we believe, should provide much better effects estimates. One of the important things is also social listening, which basically means is that you try to understand the unstructured data online, and there's a kind of process for that. You want to collect the social data. You need to find all kind of features, and you have to find all kind of opinion words and extract them. And finally, you can, for instance, assess the orientation of the opinion words, and then you can create a specific sentiment score. And finally, you can summarize what is happening. This is a very intensive process, typically, and this social listening also provides all kinds of new information. The most simple output is probably a word cloud, but you can also classify specific positive elements. You can use the data to see if are people positive or are people negative about your brand. And this type of listening can also, for instance, create all kinds of brand association networks. So still, many of this data is pretty descriptive. Although what we see, for instance, in science, there's some work, for instance, by Kooge that links, for instance, the valence score or the sentiment of the data to market share data or to sales data. And they actually show some effects of these social data. One of the things is also that people want to use these new data sources to, for instance, predict developments. And there's the example of, and that's a famous example where you have all kind of, where Google looked at what is happening with people looking for flu, and can you use these data to predict what is happening with flu? Well, now it's winter, at least in parts of the world, so that's many people have the flu. So maybe a manufacturer or pharmaceutical companies want to know what is actually happening there. But the question is, how valuable is this data, and can you use this data? So there's also I think this paper is being published in Science, where they actually warn to combine all kind of data sources, where they label that as big data hubris, that almost sounds as a kind of illness already. But and that's an important warning which we share in this book, is that integration of data can be very, very valuable, but you should be also understand what you're doing and be careful about it. Importantly, in our book, it's not only about when we're analyzing the data, it's also about that you should tell, if you analyze the data, you should basically be able to communicate to, for instance, the management what the analysis shows. And one of the problems with big data is probably also the risk of information load. There's much more information available, and still our human mind can only process limited information. And what we want to pledge for in our book is actually that in having impact, you need to do, of course, good analytics, but you also should be able to tell the story. You should be able to speak in such a language and to use such a structure that you communicate your findings pretty well. And you should also use all kinds of visualization tools to that help you in emphasizing what is actually important. And we pay specific attention to this topic in our book, but for this presentation I won't go into too much depth, but we clearly see that that is a very important topic. Finally, I want to strong focus on big data capabilities. One of the most important issues is actually that there's a talent gap. There's a strong demand for analytical talent within business. However, the supply of people is much less than what is actually needed. And we also observe that, for instance, in our education, the students that have a strong analytical training find it much easier to get a job than students that, for instance, focus mainly on marketing management. The question is, of course, from a people side, what are you looking at? And also, how do different departments within the organization view the marketing intelligence process? And that's important to understand as from an organization's perspective. More specifically on the people side, you need to understand what you're looking for. And we observe 4 types of capabilities that employees should have. First, they could have analytical capabilities. So that means they should do good statistical modeling, understand experiments, know what to do with all kinds of things like decision trees. However, they should also have a business sense, and maybe have deep industry knowledge, leadership qualities. They should also understand data and tools, so that's more the data science part where you need to understand SQL or new methods such as Hadoop. And finally, they should be able to communicate and visualize. The question is, if you hire analytical talent, do people have all these skills in place? So we distinguish 4 possible profiles, which could be part of your big data team. So you could have the consultant, the data specialist, with especially strong capabilities in the analytical side, the data analyst, and the IT professional, which is very strong in data and tools. Having these people on board jointly could create a strong team. What is important is in the case studies we describe, but also what we observe in practice, that big data initiatives can actually be rewarding. And this is an example from an online company that improved their personalization methods. And they achieved both a cost reduction, the click-through rate improved, but also customer satisfaction improved strongly. So this is an example where you basically observe that your value to firm is increasing through cost reduction and probably higher conversion rates, but also the value to customer is increasing through personalization. What we learned from these cases is that there are important learning points. First, we see that firms can benefit from extensive analytical exercises. And these benefits can be both direct but also indirect. For instance, in the case mentioned for these online retailers, we observe that the direct benefits we are clear, but also indirectly in that firm, the marketing intelligence department learned to work closely with the IT department as well as the finance department. But we also observe that it's better to start small with kind of R&D type of projects to prove, let's say, it's a kind of proof of concept, and then later on, if it is successful, scale it up to really large operations. It's also important that you should have a data-driven culture. As scientists, we tend to develop the most complicated model. However, in practice, it is, especially when doing analytics, it's important to be pragmatic. So you could do all kind of, for instance, complicated vector autoregressive models or complicated logistic type, multi-level latent class, whatever type of models, but in practice sometimes more pragmatic and simple models are preferred. Finally, it's important that you should work closely with other departments, for instance, IT and finance. So what I've tried today is to guide you a bit through our big data value creation model. And I understand that this is only a glance of what we've been discussing in our book. You can find more information about the book on our website, which is called www.bigdatasmartmarketing.com. I want to end with a small slide where I discuss our book structure. There in our book we have general chapters which talks about the challenges, how you can create value, and specifically then what some key chapters on data, on analytics, and building successful capabilities. And within each of these key chapters, we have more in-depth chapters. And these in-depth chapters are meant for the people that really want to learn more about, for instance, analytics, or how you can create value, impact with storytelling and visualization. So we have general chapters, key chapters that have a higher level focus, and more in-depth chapters that have a more in-depth focus, creating a deep dive on specific issues necessary to further understand what is happening in each of these elements of our value creation model. And of course, you can order our book, and I'm not trying to advertise Amazon, but that website or that retailer is selling that book as well. I think it's now time for Q&A, so I'm happy to answer your questions.
Hey, Peter. This is Kay. Thank you so much. We do have a few minutes for questions. I just want to have a reminder. Please send your questions directly through the Chat with Presenter function in the left-hand corner of your screen. Peter, as some of the questions that came in had to do kind of with that great categorization you had of the different skills that data analytics needs. But also, so I want to kind of ask it this way. Given the explosion in analytic approaches, and particularly we kind of bring in the whole computer science approach and small data and big data and all the combinations, how can a marketing insights organization keep up, for one thing? And how can they expect it to be experts in all these small, agile organizations, right? Yeah. Is it this combination of, you can't hire all of them. They're not going to be experts. How do you kind of figure out what core capabilities you need in-house and when you're better partnering with an agency or an analytics firm?
Yeah. Well, I think this is an important question. Of course, it depends on the size of the organization. So first, we also made a kind of development through in our thinking. When we started 10 years ago or something, we had the idea, well, you should be able to be a strong analyst, to have business sense, to visualize, etc. We now see, especially when big data is growing and firms are investing more in-house in setting up, let's say, large-scale marketing intelligence departments, it's more possible to have people that have different roles. And these people, for instance, the data analyst, could strongly focus on finding the best analytical strategies to analyze the data. Whereas the data specialist maybe should focus much more on how to create accessible data files. How can you use Hadoop? How can you integrate the data, etc. So we basically have left our idea that you should have, let's say, the perfect employee in this respect. It's more about the perfect team. Then your question: what should you develop in-house versus what should you develop get from outsiders? That's more kind of in general. When big data is very important to you and it's very value creating for you, I would be careful in becoming too dependent on outside suppliers. So that's a kind of general rule.
Great.
In terms of, yeah?
Yeah. Let me, if I can, let me move on to another question that we just received, and it's really, one of the things I found fascinating when I was reading through your book is the focus on not forgetting all the classical approaches that we have to getting insights from data. And I think sometimes the traditional approaches that we have get lost with all this new exciting data. And so the question that comes up is, which is kind of more, and maybe you can address this, how do we identify which is more important or significant or relevant to kind of getting insights? Is it the traditional marketing variables, the things we've been measuring for a long time, or is it the data that we get from our new exciting big data sources?
Yeah. Well, I think you should be, and that's rightfully mentioned by you, and it's also what we pledge for in our book, is you should not throw away what we've done for years. So that's an important lesson. Secondly, is if you look, and I think we sometimes also refer to that in our book, for instance, what is the added value of social data in all kind of models, for instance, to predict market share or to predict whatever. You see that the added value, it differs between industries, but in many cases it is there, but it's not so significant. Or it's not so, it is significant, but the size of these effects are not impressive. So there is something going on, and it might be useful to look at what is happening there, but let's say the strong effects can still be found in promotions, advertising, etc. So and that's where we stand a bit. Some of the data, and I've done a project in where we look more at internal big data and how can we explain customer satisfaction. And also there you see, the effects are there, but you see problems sometimes when linking, let's say, big data to sometimes traditional market research data.
Yeah. Well, and that's another kind of a set of questions that came in earlier in the talk was you have this distinction between structured data and unstructured data and internal data and external data. And the question came up of, what do you see as the key challenges that exist in combining structured and unstructured data? And let me add on to that, and maybe you can address this as well. Some more specific questions in terms of how you categorize things. When you think about like self-reported behavioral data, right? People responding to surveys, things like self-report. How would you classify that in the value-added scale, as you had all these different kind of how valuable it is? And the other question that came up was you had categorized sensor data and mobile data as unstructured. And the question came up is, why would they not be in the structured category, given that perhaps they kind of show up with specific fields or attributes?
Yeah, these are many questions. I hope I don't miss one. Let me start with the question on let's say these what are the big challenges of integrating existing data and new data sources. One of the main challenge is probably the integration. So because the question is, can you integrate these new data with, for instance, if you have social data, can you integrate that with customer level data? That's not so straightforward. And maybe you can use all kind of cookies or whatever, or try to link that. So data integration is really a big challenge. So the things we observe mainly nowadays is actually more linking them. Let's say you have to aggregate the data. So you aggregate social data, you aggregate your brand level data, and then you try to make links. So the data integration is a big challenge, and also of these new data sources is, and that's what we mentioned before, is what is the added value of these new data sources? So what is the information value, so to say, and how does it really drive customer behavior or market behavior? So that's one of the and a big challenge, for instance, still with social data, is how can you get the right information from it? So that's my that's your. I think that was your first question. I tend to forget the second one, but the mobile data isn't that structured as well. In terms of, for instance, if it's mobile, you want to know which device, for instance, is being used. That would typically be structured. If you have mobile data and it's more location-based, let's say it's not typical market research. It's not typical data, so there needs to be something done. It might move much more. It might move to structured data probably, but we believe it's still in the relatively early stages. And we tend to classify it for now as unstructured.
Oh, okay. And part of it is because it's nascent and we're just trying to figure it out. Yeah. Well, we had several other questions that came in right at the last minute that we didn't get a chance to get to. And if Peter didn't get to your questions, or if there are additional things you'd like to discuss with him, we invite you to reach out to him through us at meetings@msi.org. Peter, I want to thank you. This was great. One of the things I find really helpful about your framework is just the way it categorizes things that are just so messy. Allows you to kind of say, okay, are we looking to solve a problem, or are we looking for collateral catches? Are we looking at the market level, or are we looking at the customer level? I find it just having a lens through which to look at these things, I found it very, very helpful. For everyone, I want to let you know that our next webinar will be called Partnering with a Frenemy, very focused on business-to-business partnerships, featuring Professor Sandy Japp of Emory University, and it'll be February 11th at 1 p.m., and we look forward to seeing you there. Many thanks to the members of MSI audience for participating in our webinar series, and Peter, thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. To you all, bye.